First, the problem, which we modestly refer to as the last great unsolved problem. So let's take a brief look at the last 40 years of GNSS to see why we can make that claim. So the GPS system was first built in the 70s, and the concept was and remains that the receiver measures its distance from the time of flight of the signal, and the underlying assumption back in the 70s and until today is that that signal flies uninterrupted from the satellite to the ground. So this is something you all know, of course, but let's take a brief look at how the receiver measures the time delay, because this is going to be very important to us when we get to the L5 signal. So the signal from the satellite is a carrier wave modulated by a square wave, so you get these phase changes. At the receiver, it strips off the carrier and is left with the original spreading code, the square wave, buried in noise, of course, but we just represent it here without noise in red. The receiver correlates with its own copy of the spreading code, represented here in blue. Red combined with blue gives us purple, as explained by Barack Obama. And then what you get in the receiver is this correlation response, which is a triangular response. And the single most important key feature of the civilian frequency for GPS and most other GNSSs is that this correlation response has a base of plus or minus 300 meters, because 300 meters is the distance between these bits of the spreading code. And back in the 70s, when GPS was first designed, the anticipated accuracy of the system, if you were using the military dual frequency P code, the anticipated accuracy was order of 10 meters. So we've come a long way since then. In the 80s, the situation had already changed rapidly. There was better signal processing, and with differential GPS, accuracy of around 1 meter with open sky was common for civilian users. Then in the 90s, there was a strong focus and a lot of development about carrier phase differential, again using the differential concept, but using the carrier phase measurement. And I was very delighted to hear Dr. Arias refer twice to integer ambiguity resolution, which is what's at the heart of this, which in the 90s gave us products that are now common for surveying, machine control, and so on, where we have a couple of centimeter accuracy with open sky. In the 2000s, a lot of attention was turned to assisted GPS, which is the technique that's necessary to make your GPS work in a cell phone. And the emphasis here was not so much on accuracy, but improving time to fix, which got down to a second, and improving sensitivity, which increases by about 30 dB, which is 1,000 times compared to non-assisted GNSS. And so this is standard nowadays in all smartphones, and we take for granted that when we are outside and we bring up Google Maps, the blue dot appears in about a second, and this is why. So by this century, GPS and GNSS is found in use with high speed, high sensitivity, and great accuracy anywhere where you have open sky, meaning no buildings to block the signal. Even satellites use satellite navigation, including GEOs. And if you think about it, how can a GEO use GPS? I mean, a GEO is behind or higher than the GPS satellites. Here's roughly to scale, the low Earth orbit satellites are here. A lot of them use GPS for obvious reasons. They're in the beam of the satellite. But GEOs can use GPS because they can track the signal from the GPS satellite on the other side of the Earth, even though they have to be quite specific about which satellites they try to acquire. And the signal is a lot weaker out here than it is on the Earth. But the GEOs use techniques not dissimilar to what you have in smartphones. So I'll just bring that up as an example of showing that the GNSS has really permeated everything and is used in literally far out examples like locating GEO satellites. In the last 10 years, there's been a lot of attention on spoofing and jamming, increased attention. In fact, you might have noticed that this week there was an article in New York Times about this very topic. Uh, and this remains a significant threat. However, there is at least one known solution to this problem if you have the means to implement it, which is to have a phased array antenna and construct beams for each channel, where each beam is only in the direction of the particular satellite of interest. So this is, of course, quite difficult to realize in practice, but the point is it's at least known and possible. And I want to contrast this with this problem that we frequently face in cities. I imagine you are that person, and you're tracking GNSS satellites, but not one of them is line of sight, i.e. in direct view. The line of sight signals are all completely blocked by the buildings, and what you are tracking are reflections. How do you solve this problem? Until recently, this was an unsolved problem, and you could not do it with any amount of money if that was your situation. If you started up your receiver in that situation, you could not do this. So intellectually, of course, this is a very challenging and interesting problem, but commercially, is this an important problem? And the answer is, oh yes, this is very important. Within Google, we have a thing called the Android Customer Advisory Board, and we do surveys of our customers. So our big customers are the phone makers and the app developers. And in 2018, they told us that inaccuracy in urban areas was the #1 issue they were facing with location in general. Also, from our own tests, one of which is shown in the background of this slide, based on the accuracy we know we get from phones and the number of phones there are in cities and the amount of use they get, we know that there are over 1 billion fixes per day from smartphones that are at least on the wrong side of the street or even on the wrong city block. And so what this means is that pedestrian navigation in cities is not possible in this situation, and something you yourself may have experienced. Rideshare apps such as Uber, Lyft, and so on, and including sharing scooters and bicycles, these things require sidewalk level accuracy in order to rendezvous with the customer. So I myself have experienced this often, and you may have, where you call for a Lyft or an Uber and it arrives on the wrong side of the street, and depending on the street, that might mean it's just impossible for them to get to you and the whole system just breaks down. So that makes this a very important problem and why I'm talking about it today.